it's a very, in my opinion, interesting topic, even though when you first hear the word tzedakah, if you had to go and ask your average Jew, what is a Megillah? They probably wouldn't know. If you had to go ask your average Jew in, the south of America, what is a lev, which is a heart in Hebrew, they wouldn't know. But you ask them what tzedakah is, they know what it is. Tzedakah is one of those words that a lot of Jews know. I'd say Mazel Tov and tzedakah are up there in terms of, being the top 3 words, or maybe like chutzpah. You're going to throw in those words that the non-Jews use in Hollywood, or the Jews use in Hollywood. I don't know, whoever's using it in Hollywood. It's not so clear what tzedakah is, and that's what we're going to be going through today. And I'll hopefully end off the class with, why we should be giving tzedakah. What can we gain from giving tzedakah other than maybe it's a commandment from God? We will see whether that's true or not soon. Okay, first of all, just to make a little bit light about tzedakah, I've mentioned this story to some people in the past, but I'll say it now because this is being recorded. I've got a few stories about tzedakah. Sometimes when I'm on the receiving end, sometimes when I'm the giving end. This particular one was when I was in downtown. I was living in San Diego, and the leftovers that I used to have from Shabbos, I would deliver to the poor and the homeless in downtown San Diego on Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night. And I was there with a cousin of mine, and we were delivering cholent, which I had like half a pot of cholent. How do you deliver cholent downtown? Well, you have to heat the cholent for hours so that it's hot enough that by the time that you get to downtown San Diego, which is 20, 30 minutes later, it's still hot. And then you have to have a scooper, a ladle, and you have to have plates, and you have to have spoons, and you got to go one by one and give. And it's not so simple giving tzedakah to the homeless, because sometimes they fight over the food. So you have to make sure that everybody gets equal portions. So this time I was delivering, I'd already delivered about 10 cholents, and I had one more cholent left. And I saw a man sitting on the sidewalk from afar. And I don't know what it was, but there was something about this man that made me a little bit suspect. So I said to my cousin in the car, who had never done this with me before, he was an 18-year-old from Canada. I said to him, if you see me running, drive the car down the road and meet me there, and that's where you'll pick me up. But, I don't think anything's going to go wrong. But if something goes wrong, I'm going to run. So I'm walking towards this man. He is, as you would say in America, he's an African American. In South Africa, you'd say he's black-skinned. And he had dreadlocks, and he had tattoos all over his face. I only saw the tattoos when I got close to him. But, as you're getting old, and as I'm walking towards him, maybe 10 meters away, he stands up, and the guy's like 6'5", about, I don't know, let's say I'm between 75 and 80 kilos. He's 130. He's a big guy. And I'm looking up at this Goliath, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm about to run. And I say to him, man, are you hungry? He goes, oh, brother, that's amazing. What do you have? I say, I've got hot stew. He goes, oh, I would really love it, but no, thank you. I say, why? You're not hungry. He goes, no, I'm very hungry. So why don't you want it? He said, no, I'm vegan. And that's the first time that I've ever heard a beggar refuse food because they are vegan. Thank God that some places in America have got to the point where you can be a beggar, a homeless person, and still be vegan. I think that's like one of the best things I've ever heard. And the best part of that story was, I said, well, sir, it's your lucky day, because this is a vegan cholent. And it happened to be a vegan cholent that week, no meat, and he was so happy. Why am I mentioning this story? Is because it's not so simple when you're giving out charity. You don't know who the receivers are, how they will receive it, etc., etc. And that's just an opener to what we're going to be discussing now, of some of the issues involved in charity giving. Where does this word tzedakah come from? Does it mean charity? I'll read you a definition from a book called Orchot Tzadikim, which is a self-help book of Judaism, and this is on the chapter of generosity. I'm just saying the English version. It's an exact English translation. A person should be generous with his energy, going out of his way for people, bearing their yoke and their burden, feeling pain at their anguish, praying for their sake, rejoicing in their joy, visiting the sick, and doing kindness to the dead. A person should especially be generous with his knowledge of the Torah, teaching every person knowledge and drawing their hearts towards heaven. This is in the chapter of generosity. It seems that the author of this Orchat Tzadikim is assuming that charity extends beyond money given, even to the point that you should share your knowledge. The first time I believe that the word tzedakah is used is in the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verse 6. It's regards to Abraham, the covenant of the parts. And there's this verse there which says, Vehemin b'Hashem v'yachshaveo lo tzedakah. And Abraham believed in God, and someone considered it tzedakah. It says, v'yachshaveo lo, and it was considered to him tzedakah. There's an argument here between some commentaries in the Rambam over how do you interpret this. One person interprets it, the Rambam, that Abraham found God's blessing to be tzedakah. So the Rambam is assuming that the first time this word tzedakah is used, it is charity, meaning Abraham believed in God and God blessed him with charity for it. That's the Rambam's version. The other versions say no. Abraham believed in God and God considered it tzedakah. Not Abraham considering it tzedakah, God considered it tzedakah. Therefore, that interpretation says that
Sorry, Ryan, I muted you by mistake.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm unmuted. No problem. No problem.
Right.
Okay, so I'm back. The second opinion says that God considered it tzedakah, that what Abraham was doing, believing in God, and they translate tzedakah to mean righteousness. So if that's the interpretation, then tzedakah doesn't really mean giving money only. It means any act of righteousness. And that might be where the Orchat Tzadikim is coming from, where he describes generosity, not only with regards to sharing your possessions, but just general righteousness that people do. Rabbi Sachs wants to kind of blend them together. The Chief Lord Rabbi Sachs, he wants to say, when you give $100 to somebody because you owe them money, that is justice. When you give someone $100 out of your heart that you don't owe them anything, that is charity. But in Judaism, it's almost as if when you're giving money to someone, there's an element of tzedakah and there's of righteousness tzedakah, and there's an element of charity involved, because everything is God's anyway in the first place. So when you are sharing of your wealth to someone else, there is an element of righteousness that you're doing, and there's an element of charity, but it's not just charity because it's the right thing to do to give, because it's not only yours in the first place, it's all of us. It's almost like a communal body of ownership, because God gave the world to us all. So, maybe it's both. One of the things that Rabbi Sachs writes is that the origin of giving money is actually not as old as other things. We were originally agricultural people. We had commandments of leaving the corners of our field to the poor. It wasn't so much that we were giving actively money. It was more like we were leaving things for other people. That after we left the agricultural age, it started being much more focused on giving money. But the idea that Rabbi Sachs is developing is that charity is a bigger construct than just giving money, and that we saw also in the quote we mentioned from the Orach HaTzadikim. But let's go to Rabbinic Judaism, which is post-agricultural times, where we know that when people talk about tzedakah today, we're talking about actual money. How does that work? Who is it for? So the Rambam, in his book of the laws of giving to the poor, chapter 7, he says that this only applies to giving to the poor. You only really fulfill the commandments of giving charity when you give to the poor and the destitute. What other options are there? Well, there's lots of other options. There's giving to school institutions. There's building hospitals. There's giving to Torah scholars. There's having a rabbi. There's having a chazan. There's paying for other people's kids' educations who can't afford it. Would you consider them poor just because they can't afford private school education? We'll come to that in a few moments. But the Rambam is saying, no, poor is poor. Homeless people, or maybe not only homeless people, but very poor people, that is charity. When you want to give to an institution like a hospital or a school, it might be considered another commandment, something good, but that's not charity. That's not considered charity. The Maharik says, no, giving to institutions not only is tzedakah, not only is hiring a chazan for Rosh Hashanah or whatever it is, a tzedakah, but it's even a higher form of tzedakah than giving to the poor. There is an ancient argument between the Maharik and his followers and the Rambam and their followers over which is the highest priority of giving charity. The Rambam says there is no priority list, it's only the poor. Whereas the Maharik will say something like this: I agree that you need to give to the poor if they are dying. Of course, life is more important than anything. But you go to San Diego, poor people are vegans, okay? They ain't dying. So in that situation, the second opinion is saying the highest form is only poor who really are going to die if you don't give them the food. But other than that, you should give to your institutions first. And if there's any money after that, then you give to the poor and the destitute. That is the big argument in those commentaries. Now, let's go within the Maharik. So the Maharik was saying you should give to institutions. This is what I'm about to mention. I'm not going to dwell on it a lot, but this is a big debate in Israel today, more than ever before. And this is something that makes a lot of people very irate. This is the kollels and religious people who study and do not work. Can you consider those institutions a better charity to give to than it is to give to poor people? Because I've mentioned, the Maharik is saying that it's better to give to institutions rather than give to poor people. So if you understand the world like the Rambam, the answer is no. Of course you should give to the poor people. And not only that, but I'm going to read you this Rambam just for those viewers who are not here and they're going to watch me on YouTube. Listen to how, and this was a whole long quote, but I'm just quoting a little bit of the Rambam. This is from his Laws of Talmud Torah, chapter 3. Anyone who decides to occupy himself with Torah and not work, but obtain his livelihood from charity, desecrates God's name, denigrates the Torah, extinguishes the light of faith, and brings evil upon himself. Wow. Maimonides was very anti the idea that people do not work, okay? He was a student himself, but he worked. He was, the doctor to the Sultan, and he thought it was a terrible practice for people to be getting money to learn the Torah. The Aruch HaShulchan, who's a later rabbi, but he's going according to the other opinions like the Marik and the Rosh, etc., he argues with the Rambam, and he says, and again, I'm quoting, this is in Yoredeah, chapter 246. I'm just quoting this just because it's such an argument in Israel, and I wanted to show you the extremes. One who is a master of the academy, someone who's a master of Torah, and disseminates Torah to the public, and he cannot leave his home except to perform a mitzvah, it is a sin for such a person not to accept tzedakah from others. Even if he knows a particular trade that he can make money from to support his family, still, he should still be in kollel, not take the money, for the love of Torah will be denigrated. So the Aruch HaShulchan is saying the opposite, and the logic behind that is, well, if you don't let the people study, you're never going to get teachers. You're never going to get good teachers, and therefore the whole society crumbles. No, teachers should take money to go, and today we have bursaries to go to university. If people go, the best students get bursaries. Why? Because you want the best people in those fields. That's kind of the logic where they're coming from, but the Rambam was very against that. There is a third opinion, and this is the later Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He said that there were these two brothers, the sons of Jacob, Yisachar and Zvulun, where one of the tribes apparently were Torah students, and the other tribes were tradesmen, and they paid for the ones who were learning to learn, and the ones who were learning on behalf of the people who worked. And Rav Moshe Feinstein views this as an ideal, that the vision that he had of the Torah was that some people are learning, and they shouldn't feel bad for learning because they're doing it on behalf of everyone else. And the ones who are working so that they can provide for the ones who aren't working. So he viewed that as the ideal. I'm not going to say too much about that, but in my personal opinion, I think that we're in a big problem. I think that there are far too many people just learning and too little people working to provide for those means. That's my own little piece, but you can decide how you want to feel about those three. So that is all about that. And again, if you were the Maimonides, you would say, of course, you should rather give the poor than give to kollels. But that Maharik view, which is institutions come first, that opens up, a rabbit box to give to kollels and that type of thing. Here is another topic that is spoken about, and this is a much more real topic for me and you. Are taxes to state governments considered tzedakah? So we're in a situation whereby if you live in the United States, now I'm going to come to South Africa in a second, but if you live in the United States, the government does actually provide a lot of social services for you. During the lockdown now, millions of people are getting paid money on a weekly or monthly basis because they don't have work and the government's coming in. Actually, I will mention in San Diego, there is no such thing as poverty. I mean, there is poverty, but there's no such thing as starvation. There is poverty, but there's no such thing as starvation. You live downtown San Diego, you live outside, there are 3 churches offering food 3 times a day to whoever wants to come. You don't have to starve. There is enough food so that you can even be vegan. So one could argue that maybe giving the government is charity. Now in South Africa, giving the government taxes, are they going to use those taxes for themselves or for the country? That's why it's hard to talk about South Africa, okay? But the question was asked to the American rabbis are taxes tzedakah? So Rabbi Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, he assumed yes. He assumed that yes, when you're giving money to the American government, they are providing social services, and therefore you can write that off as tzedakah. Rav Moshe Feinstein did not believe this. He thought that you cannot say that paying your taxes is tzedakah. Rather, at the same time, he made kind of a middle ground. He said, you only have to pay your charity after you've paid your taxes. You don't have to pay your 10% or whatever it is from your revenue that you made. No, get rid of your taxes, and after that, then you pay your percentage of what it is. But you can't say that your taxes is the tzedakah itself, like the tzitz eliezer. The commentaries have a problem with this view that taxes could be tzedakah, because if you live if you are living in most places where the government's going to tax you quite a lot, so you're not really going to have a lot of money to give to other people other than the government. If taxes are tzedakah, so let's say, I don't know, a person's earning $100,000. I don't know, let's just throw that out. And he's paying 30% to the government. So now you're saying he's giving $30,000 to the government. So he's only got $70,000 left to live in the year, which is not that much in the United States. How do how are the poor people going to get money? How are the institutions going to get money? You've given all your tzedakah to charity. So even the people who agree with the tzitz eliezer, who say that, yes, you can consider the government taxes as tzedakah, they would even say that anything above 20%, you should still give tzedakah over that. So he assumes that you pay tzedakah on money after you've paid your 20% tax. So, the first 20% tax, great, you can consider that tzedakah, but anything after that, you should be giving tzedakah. Okay, so that's a little bit, about taxes and state laws, etc., etc. I think it's very difficult to say that paying money to governments is tzedakah itself. You might say it's a little bit of tzedakah, but I find it quite hard to believe that view that the whole amount that you're giving is tzedakah. You'll never end up giving tzedakah really to other people. That's my personal opinion, but think about it. Next question. This is more an ancient question. Do you sell institutions which are funded by tzedakah to save lives? Now, in the old days, when Jews were taken ransom, so they had to make decisions. Do you sell a shul to save a ransomed hostage? Do you sell a mikveh? Do you sell land? Do you get rid of the rabbi's job? Do you get rid of, the chevra kadisha? At what limit? What limit? Today, we don't, thank God, have a lot of hostage situations, but I'd say this is an applicable question when it comes to people who are sick. So I've seen a lot of these, kind of social network, someone's sick, they're trying to raise money for someone, etc., etc. How far do you go? Do you need to sell the schools in order to save someone who's going to die unless they get a kidney transplant, or etc., etc.? This is a hard question to answer, but the bottom line, the Shach and the Taz and Yorodea and others, they say no, you don't sell the institutional money in order to save lives of individuals for a few reasons. Number one is, even though originally these institutions were founded on charity, once they are founded, you can't say that it's still a charity organization. It takes on its own entity of ownership beyond the benefactors who have given that money. That's the first reason. The second reason is that normally institutions were funded by benefactors who gave the money specific for that reason, to start a school, to start a hospital, to start a this, to start a that. Even if someone's going to die at the expense of you not selling the institution, you can't change the benefactor's original motivation just to save one person, because who's to say that one person's life is more important than a whole institution and all the goodness that that institution does? It's a hard question to be in. I don't think today anyone expects an institution to go insolvent in order to pay for someone to live, but that would be a, lo aleinu, a hard question to really deal with. What do you sell in order to save someone's life? Another question, and this is probably the most practical one, is how much charity do we give? So people throw out this 10%. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say that. The Shulchan Aruch says 20% if you want to be a generous person, 10% if you want to be an average person, and less than 10% you're a miser. Okay, that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. So we just, all assume that we average people and we try to give out 10%, but really that's not what the Shulchan Aruch says. This is not from the Torah that it mentions the amounts. This is in the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah, who's, also in the Shulchan Aruch, he comes to give us the tradition, which is charity starts at home. So first thing, chayecha kodmin. You have to take care of yourself first. Don't even give charity unless you are taken care of yourself. Then, if you are taken care of, then give your parents and your children and your brothers and sisters, and then your relatives, and then your neighbors, and then the ones who are in the next city, and then, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is an important principle. The commentaries do ask, if that's true, that chayecha kodmin, that you always come first, so where do you draw the line? Do you say that only after you've paid for your $40,000 Passover program at the 5-star hotel, once you've come, then you have money for your cousins, and only after you've given your $50,000 loan to your cousin, then the guys next door come, etc., etc. They ask, you'll never ever give money to strangers. How can the law, you're always going to know someone who needs money. So how is it that tzedakah really works if, you're always meant to give to the people closest to you? And again, the commentaries answer that, and this is, in the Aruch HaShulchan and others, that you should, if it's only talking about when it says you come first, it's only talking about really where you are that poor. But if you're not that poor, if you're like middle class or even lower class, you should be giving some charities to strangers, because that's kind of what the intent of this commandment is. Yes, you should give yourself first and your close family and relatives as well, but there should be some funds going to people that you don't know, because otherwise the poor people will never get anything. So that's an assumption. When you say that you should give to your cousins, you should, but you should be also giving to others. Make sure that there's some money for strangers as well. So that's a very practical suggestion where, that's where we come, that you give a 10%. Two more things about tzedakah, and then I'm going to go into some other theories. Day school tuition. This is a hard question to answer. Is paying school fees tzedakah? If you take the average American or the average South African as well, I don't know how much fees are at the King David and the Herzliya schools, but I'm sure they are quite a lot. The average Jewish couple in Cape Town, Johannesburg, and in America and around the world, after they've paid for school fees in full, they do not have a lot of money. They really, really do not. Even if they may even be in debt. They might be two doctors and they still might be in debt, because if they have 4 or 5 kids and they're paying full, there is no 10% to give to anybody, assuming that you come first. So how does that work? Thus, the Tzitz Eliezer says, school fees is tzedakah. So rather pay your school fees in full instead of asking for bursaries and then trying to give tzedakah to everybody, because the school fees is tzedakah. Rabbi Brody, who's got an amazing article, I've based a lot of this on Rabbi Brody's article. Thank you, Rabbi Brody. He says that, in his opinion, when the Ramah said you've got to provide for yourself, he suggests parents can have more kids. So the question was asked to him, Rabbi, should I have more kids, but I can't really afford full school fees for my kids? What's better, for me to have more kids and ask for help for tuition, or to stop having kids and pay full fees? So Rabbi Brody thought, it's an interesting question, Rabbi Brody thought it's better to have more kids, and you can ask for assistance for school. That's not a bad thing, because for you, if you're interested in having more kids, that's a bigger blessing than accepting some tzedakah for tuition assistance. But you would say in those situations, you have to be quite strict, meaning if you're going to be asking for tuition assistance, you should not be spending extras. He goes to the point of saying, like a lulav and etrog, you should not be purchasing your own lulav and etrogs. You should be using the synagogues. If you're asking for school tuition assistance, don't spend the money on all that other stuff. But you should have the kids that you want to have. So that's an interesting one. But yes, can school-based tuition be considered tzedakah? Some say yes, some say no. But if you aren't going to consider tzedakah, it's very, very difficult to say that people should be giving tzedakah at all unless you're earning a hell of a lot of money. Okay, that's a little bit of the Jewish side about tzedakah. Now I'm going to go into just like theories about charity in general. What are motivations for tzedakah? So economist James Adriani, he wrote about this thing called perfect altruism, which would mean that people give tzedakah because they want the best for the recipient. It's not about them, it's about the recipient getting it. And he proved that there are really not a lot of perfect altruists when it comes to tzedakah, because he gave case studies, and I'll just give you one. One case study was the government was willing to tax, rich people and say, the money that we're going to tax you, we're going to give to charities. People didn't like it. Even though the same amount of money was going to the charity, meaning the individuals were going to give $100 a month, and here the governments were going to tax people $100 and give the $100 to charity. People didn't like it. They wanted to be the ones who gave tzedakah, not the government taxing them and the government giving the tzedakah. So that was one, example of how pure altruists are few and far in between. Another example that he gave was volunteering. If people really wanted the best for charities, they would never volunteer, because they would rather say, I earn more than this institution's got to pay a volunteer to help out. Rather, let me work more and give more funds than volunteer my time, where my time is worth more as a lawyer than it is in helping out at this orphanage. But we see that doesn't happen. People do volunteer their times at orphanages, which shows that they're not really so concerned for the institution. They want to give of themselves, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that this idea of pure altruism, it's not really evident from the statistics, because bottom line, recipients could receive more if you didn't volunteer and you gave the money instead. Okay, that's one example. Second motivation the economists bring down is something called the warm glow theory. And the warm glow theory says that people give charity even though they think that other people will give charity. Some people will dafka want to give charity instead of others because they think that they're the best people to give charity. Meaning my $100 that I'm giving to this charity is worth more than another person's $100, either because I have better intention or because at least I know that it will get there and it will get there better and more efficient, etc., etc. So that's almost like a competitive theory of charity, but statistics prove, that in certain situations, people give charity in a competitive way. The last one, that the Amichai Glazer, the economist, he brought this down. He said prestige. Thank you. He said prestige, that donors give to signal wealth status. And this is interesting because when it comes to like boards in hospitals and stuff, who gave what? Platinum, gold, silver, etc., etc. It's very uncommon that if you ask someone for R1 million to be a platinum member, that they'll give more than R1 million. They normally give the exact amount that has been asked of them to make it into that bracket of platinum, gold, and silver. Now, again, I'm not trying to mock people for giving money, but it seems that there's a lot of prestige involved by the fact that people don't give more than the minimum amount to make it into that category. Demographics of charity, well, number one, the economist Arthur Brooks brings down that high-income people give charity a lot because they've got disposable income. Low-income people give a lot of charity because they need hope, and they give to a lot of religious institutions. The one who gives the least amount of money is middle class. Interesting. The lower class and the high class give. The middle class give the least. Charity giving increases with age and education. Women give more than men historically. And obviously the rich have the biggest incentive to give charity because they get tax breaks. To end off in the last 3 minutes, benefits of tzedakah. So here we are on Rosh Hashanah trying to give tzedakah to make sure that we as pure as possible in front of Hashem. What are the personal benefits that we can get? Number one, the National Institute of Health says that donating money activates pleasure centers in the brain. So there's chemical things that you can gain from giving charity. Also, tax deductions is obviously promoting generosity in your children. When children see that you are giving, they probably will become generous as well. Not only that, but when other people, your friends, see you giving, that motivates them to give. So by you giving, it's not just that you are giving your money, but you are helping charities get more because other people will give more as well. Also, you realize the value of things. You know, $10 in America isn't much, but $10 in Africa is a lot. So you can realize the monetary worth of things and how much you can make people happy. Improving personal money management. When you're trying to save money to give charity, you obviously become more fiscally sound. Another one, you make aware of others and world situations. You know, when you're giving charity, you become aware, wow, you know, there's so many people who are poor, who are needy, etc., etc. You become more empathetic and sensitive. You feel the love more for other people when you give. The last two I'm going to mention is about Hashem. You know, Hashem is giving us charity all the time. So when we emulate Hashem by giving charity, we attach ourselves to that idea of what Hashem is, what a giver is. And that's, you know, walking in God's ways. And lastly, I want to say we increase our self-esteem. When we give charity, we feel better about ourselves. We feel more worthy to be living. We feel more worthy that God gave us a life to live because maybe we are worthy of that life. And that's what I want to go into Rosh Hashanah, believing that we've done our best we can to help our fellow brethren on this planet. And we should feel good about it and feel that we have a good defense when Hashem and whoever else is asking us why we should be living, we can at least say we've made an effort to try and realize that we are worth it. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Paul, for recording. Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah gets rid of the evil decree. We will have a service on Friday, and I look forward to being with you in prayers on Rosh Hashanah. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi, from Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Jen, nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
God bless you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
No problem.
Bye.
Bye.